Right, welcome to part 2, and let's not mess around. Time is short and we'll get straight into the build. Now what you're going to have to do first is put the motors and the ESCs on the arms. Pretty simple process. You're going to need your 4 motors, you're going to need your 4 arms and your 4 ESCs. You'll also need some hex wrenches, Allen key wrenches as they're called in some parts of the world, your Loctite, some solder and your soldering iron, because yes, you will have to do some soldering here. It's unavoidable, I'm afraid. And you'll also need some wire cutters, which I have slightly out of shot, but I'll throw them in. Ta-da. And you're probably going to need some of those cable ties or some of that heat shrink I talked about. But I'll go through the process on one of the arms, and I'm not going to do all 4, it'd waste of time. So I'll just do one of the arms and you can follow suit if you like. And at the end of this, we should have 4 arms ready to fit to our super cheap mini quad build. Okay, let's get started. Here is our 1806 motor, one of them, and we've got all the nuts and bolts and screws inside. Now the first thing I usually do is get the screws out, obviously, because you're going to need those. You can't put it together without the screws. I hate these bags. Just tear the top off. That works really well. There you go. As I said, there's a lot of different screws come in the bag, and that's handy because some of them will be used to mount this prop adapter here. I'll take that off. As you can see, it's the prop adapter that goes on top of the motor and bolts on with 4 little cap head screws go in there. And as you can see, all different size screws. Now the size I think that fits in there is the shorter one. Let's try it out and see, because I can't remember. Yes, that'll be the one that fits in there. So what I'm going to do now is get ready to put some Loctite on these screws, because they really need Loctite. And what I do is I usually just get a piece of plastic. The bag that the screws came in is as good as anything. Shake up your Loctite and put a squirt on there, just a little drop or something on here. So there we go. That's enough to do a lot of screws. Now we need our Allen wrenches, and it's the smallest one. These are metric, of course, so you need to invest in some metric Allen wrenches if you don't have any hex wrenches or whatever you want to call them. I just take this and I dip the end in the Loctite, then I just stick the screw in there. Voila! I'm doing this a bit out of shot. Sorry, it's really hard when you're trying to focus on it. Don't do it up fully tight yet, because you want to put the other ones in as well. So remember, we're using the short ones, not the long ones. Just repeat that process. Dip them in the Loctite so it covers the bottom threads. Then put it in the opposite hole here. Just do it up, not tight, just loose, because we want to torque them down fairly evenly. Another one. So there's 4 of these screws. Just rip into it and you'll have no problems getting those all safely installed. Now if you don't use Loctite, as I've said, if you don't use Loctite, what will be happening is you'll be flying along and you'll hear a funny noise, unfamiliar noise, sort of a vibrating, buzzing noise, and then a few moments later your prop will come off. In fact, the whole hub will come off. So just trying to get this one in this. Here we go, Chinese quality control. It's very tight, that one. It's not cross-threaded. What's going on? One of the problems, remember, we're dealing with budget stuff here, so perhaps not all the screws will fit in all the holes. I mean, you know, this is, people often say, why would you spend so much to build a mini quad? Why do you buy those expensive motors and why do you buy those expensive frames? Well, the reality is that when you buy cheap, sometimes you have to buy twice. Sometimes, you know, that screw goes in all right. So tolerances, Chinese manufacturing tolerances, that's what it is. So yeah, you just have to be aware that, as I say, that's another reason to buy 5 motors instead of 4, because you may even find one of your motors don't go if you're going to go budget, super budget like this. And I have tried to stick with reasonably reliable parts. I mean, these motors have a reasonably good review in a lot of places, and they'll do the job. They're not, you know, this is really eccentric. It sort of does up tight and then it doesn't. And so yeah, there we go. So now we just torque them all down opposite. So do the one at not directly across the shaft from the one you've just tightened. Don't over tighten them. You've got Loctite, that'll hold them in enough. If you over tighten them, you'll strip, because they're just threading into aluminium. Although I believe the American ones actually thread into aluminum. Strange. So there you go. That's mounted this prop adapter on there. Fine, good as gold. Now of course we've got to mount the motor on the arm, which is again really simple to do. Now the longer length screws will probably do. If you push them, oops, just about lost one. Where'd that go? You can see that this is a 3mm arm, so that screw is going to protrude quite a bit, but the base on these motors has got a lot of gap in there for screws, so we'll use the longer screws to mount the motors. And what I generally do is I just put one in first, put a couple in first, just to get them started. Now these are 2mm screws, so they are quite sloppy in the base, but just put a couple of these in so that once you start putting them in with Loctite, you don't have too much trouble finding the hole. In fact, put 3 of them in. Put 3 of the damn things in. like so. I don't know if I've got enough zoom on this, but hopefully you can see through my big bodgy fingers. Now, of course, you can start putting Loctite on them. And I need a bit more Loctite because I've used up the little drop that I had there. Don't put too much out because, you know, a little goes a long way if you're doing it properly. So now we'll take the other. I shouldn't ramble on so much. People can see what I'm doing. I don't have to tell them, I suppose. But, you know, never mind. Let's put that into there. So I'll put the first one in with Loctite. Again, we don't do them right up. Next one, Loctite. You don't often need Loctite when you're building fixed wing models. It's not really that necessary, but once you get into these quads or even helicopters, Loctite is your friend. And if you're into model cars and trucks and things, well, you'll already have gallons of the damn stuff because you can't build those without Loctite, otherwise everything falls apart. Here we go. Hope I'm not going too fast for you. All right, so once again, I've got the 4 basic screws in there. Now, because this is loose in here, you might want to just line things up a bit. You know, just loosen the screws off, try and line it up so that the motor is in the middle, and I'll show you what I mean in a moment. If you look down there, you can see the bearing through the hole, and because there's a little bit of give in these screws, you can actually line it up until it's in the center before you torque all those down. And same as before, torque down one of them, like this one over here. This is just arbitrary, any one of them you can start with, and then torque the one directly opposite, and then 90 degrees out, like so, and like so. There we go. So now, yes, they don't over torque them. You will strip them if you tighten them up too much. Just remember that you're threading into aluminium, and you've got Loctite, which will be your friend. It will stop it coming undone anyway, as long as you've done your Loctiting job properly. Now just check they're all about the same torque, because sometimes when you torque one down, it loosens the others off. There we go. I'll do that one there. Okay. That's right, that all seems right. So now we have our motor on the arm. Wasn't very hard, was it? Piece of cake. And what we'll do now, of course, is we will mount the ESC on here. And there's 2 ways of doing that. First thing to do is get your ESC and open the bag. There we go. Now, a lot of people have said, oh, why don't you use bullets? You know, these are bullets here, so they come with bullets on these ESCs. There's no bullets on the motors, right? So we're going to have to do some soldering. Doesn't matter what you want to do, you have to do some soldering. There's 2 ways of mounting or joining the motors to the ESCs. There's the way if you're a really bad solderer, which is just basically to cut these wires, cut those wires, put some heat shrink on them, and then away you go. That means you're going to end up with some wires bundled up here unless you cut them really, really short. It's not my preferred way of doing it, but I do realize that a lot of people who are going to be doing this build are not going to be too keen on stripping off the heat shrink and soldering to the tiny little pads that are on the circuit board. So I'm going to do it that way. I'm going to do it the easy way for people so they can, you know, you don't have to feel so scared. But what you can do is cut back some of this heat shrink. I mean, they put way too much heat shrink on these things, so get your pliers, cut this back. This is just way too much. Get a knife. If you're going to be very careful if you're using a knife. Don't cut yourself, and don't cut the wires. Just put the sharp end poking out and just have a bit of a play here. Because what you want to do is just give yourself more wire to play with. They don't give you too much, well, they give you too much heat shrink on here, which means that, you know, a lot of that you can't work with. So I'm just going to pare back some of this clear heat shrink to try and get more access to the wires. And if you do it properly, it'll give you an extra 10 mils or 3/8 of an inch or whatever. I don't know what that is. I can't remember the old money. It's been so long. I've been working in the metric system for so long. My skills in the old system are pretty much defunct. But there you go. What I've done is I've pared that back so we've got more room to work with. You can tidy that up a bit if you like, so it looks a bit scruffy. And as we know, some people like to have their things looking really nice, so we'll just pare that back a bit, make it all even, so no one can complain, although people will. I'm sure I've killed a baby while I'm doing this. Someone will be bitching and moaning that I didn't have safety eyewear on, or something else has happened. So there you go. I've just pared back that plastic. So now when we're soldering this up, we've got a little bit more room to move. And this is where it gets really drastic and people are going to go, oh no, look at all this long wire, and you're going to cut some off. I am going to cut some off because we don't want to. I've seen people build these things and they fold this backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards and put cable ties on. And why? It's just extra, it's extra weight, it's extra drag, it's just, who cares? I mean, the motors are $9. And you're not going to wreck them by cutting the wires. As long as they're long enough to solder, you'll be fine. So we've put these side by side and have a look at how we might do that. this can probably come back about as far as here. Again, we can trim back some of this heat shrink because this is way long as well. God, they certainly get your money's worth with the heat shrink on these things. It doesn't have to be this long by any stretch of the imagination. I have to get in here. I'll just pare this back a bit. This is silly. We don't need an inch of heat shrink hanging out the back of this thing, so I'm going to pare this back a bit. Okay, so now we've cut heat shrink off both ends. Makes the ESC shorter, so it's not going to have to, we're not going to have to really scrunch up this stuff. So I'm now going to do something horrible. I'm going to cut these wires with my trusty side cutters. I'm going to leave about ½ an inch or maybe, 10 millimeters, 12 millimeters or something like that, poking out of the ESC. There we go. Ooh, I can feel people cringing. Look at that, he's taken a brand new ESC and he's cut the wires off it, but don't worry, they're not all cut off. Now I'm going to position this here, and as you can see, I can't go much past these holes because that's where the frame is. So I'm going to cut off, cut these wires off here, and look, there you go, you start cringing again because I'm cutting these wires really short and everyone will cry and grizzle in the porridge. Look at that. So for those who are a little concerned that they might get the measurements wrong, this wire length from the motor here is 25 millimeters from where it exits the motor to where we cut it off. So cut these three wires here to 25 millimeters long, right from the edge of the motor there, and that will give you the right length for connecting up to your ESC. So if you don't feel confident just eyeballing it, you can get your ruler out and do it precisely like I used to do until I got tired of doing that sort of thing precisely. There we go, that's all you need to do. Try and keep them roughly the same length, and on the ESC do the same thing, make it 25 millimeters from the edge of the circuit board to the end of the wire. I made mine a little bit shorter because, I'm probably a little bit better at soldering than most people, so I don't need the extra length. So 25 mils for the length of the motor wires coming out here, and 25 mils for the wires coming out of the ESC. That's an inch in the old money. How convenient is that? And, well, it's actually, what is it? Nearly an inch, 25.4 millimeters to an inch, I think. Oh, I should go back to sleep. There we go. So yeah, cut your wires to those lengths and you won't have any problems. So now we've got some wires, we just need to join them up. And to do that, we're going to need our soldering iron in America. Do you think it's turned on? No, it's not. And some heat shrink to cover it up once we've soldered it. So I shall turn the iron on, warm it up, and cut my heat shrink to length. Right, I've pared away the insulation on the ends of those wires there. Just going to give it going to tin the wires because you need to get plenty of solder on the wires before you, ooh, look at my shaky hands. I think I've got Parkinson's or something actually. Hands are getting shakier and shakier by the day. So I'm going to go to the doctor and see about it. It's a pain when you can't actually do stuff because your hands, sometimes they're so bad I can't even damn well fly. So yeah, and I haven't had much coffee today, so it's not that. So there we go, just make sure it's tinned on both sides because sometimes you miss a bit. Plenty of solder on these. You want nicely loaded up with solder. There we go. That's that side. And now, of course, we've got to do the motor as well. Getting rid of the insulation on here, I just use my modelling knife. This is silicon wire. It's really easy to trim the insulation off. I just sort of ring bark it, give it about, I don't know, 1/16 of an inch, 3/32 of an inch, or in the new money, that's probably about 1.5 millimeters, 2 millimeters. That's all you do. You just give it a little bit of a ring bucket and pull it, and the insulation will come off, leaving a little bit at the end that you can then tin and solder to. Let's do another one. It's actually all a bit hard, as I say, every time with camera angles and things. There we go. Oops, I scratched my brand new arm. Oh no, my goodness, a flaw in the model, so never mind. Cover that with some heat shrink or something. There we go, done. And now I shall tin these so that they're all easy to solder together. Oops, I haven't actually pulled all the insulation off that one, so I'll use my fingernails to do that. There we go, done. Doesn't take much. Oh no, and I'll push some of the strands out. Make sure the strands are all nice and parallel. Give them a twist if you need to. You don't want bits poking out because that'll make it hard to get the heat shrink on. If you're not confident in soldering, remember I did do a video a while ago showing the basics of soldering so that you can see what's required and the best techniques and things. So if you have, I'll link that in the description of this video, my introduction to soldering tutorial, so you can go and have a look at that so you know how to do things properly. So there we go, we've got the motor and the ESC ready to join together. Time to get the heat shrink out. And the best thing to cut heat shrink I found is scissors. Cuts it really well. and it gets a nice square cut. Now we can't use too much heat shrink on here, obviously, because we've got to push it back to do the soldering, and if you have it too close to the solder joint, it shrinks before you can push it back over. So really probably about this much is all we're going to need. So we'll cut 3 pieces to roughly that length, and about there, probably all different. And we can either slide them over this, but it's hard because we've got that heat shrink there that's in the way. It's a pain, that heat shrink. So I'll slide them on the motor and hopefully it'll leave us a little bit of space. There we go, that's good. And remember, it's so easy to forget about the heat shrink and solder stuff together and then find, oh man, I haven't got a heat shrink on it. So you have to unsolder it. And once you unsolder it, it never goes back as nicely as when you solder it the first time. So here we go, 3 lots of, oops, missed that one. 3 lots of heat shrink on the 3 wires. And now you've got to make a decision. Now we're going to build the thing so that 2 of the motors spin one way and 2 of the motors spin the other way. It's a quadcopter, you've got to do that. So what we're going to do with the first 2 is we're going to make 1-to-1. So with the label of the Afro 12 amp to the top, then the wires will just go 1-to-1. You notice we have sort of like top, or looking at it, top, middle and bottom. And we have top, middle and bottom. I suppose it's about upside down because I'm filming this with the camera in the wrong end. So top, middle, bottom, top, middle, bottom. We'll just join them 1 for 1, simple as. And that will give us, on 2 of the arms, motors that spin in one direction, and on the other 2 arms we'll cross over 2 of these wires. Any 2 of the wires will cross over, and that'll give us motors that spin in the opposite direction. So we don't actually have to worry too much about it as long as 2 are one way and 2 are the other way. So now I shall try and solder this without burning myself and without getting my head in shot, which is going to be a bit of a job, I reckon, but I'll give it a go. Remember, the key with soldering is everything clean, fresh solder, and don't take too long. Just heat things up and it should all flow together. A bit like that, really. I hope my head wasn't in the way. I'll try and zoom in a bit on this and get a better shot for you. Okay, I'm bound to stuff it up now because it's all in super close vision. So, as I say, soldering iron under the wires and then just let the solder flow. That's close enough for me. That's reasonably good. And then another one over here. And the important thing is get them lined up before you put the iron on, so that really all you've got to do is just heat. In fact, I'm going to turn this around so I can get the iron from this side. And you shouldn't have it sitting there stewing for a long time. It should only take as long as you see here. And if you're not very good at soldering, hey, just practice. I mean, there's no harm in practicing. And it's good fun, and it'll give you the skills you need. So there we go. Bingo! It's easy. See how simple it is. Soldering's not hard. It's not hard, honestly. And those are pretty reasonable looking soldering joints. So I've got nothing to be ashamed of there. That was lucky. And this was the first take. I didn't have to do 4 or 5 to get it right. So now we slide up our heat shrink like so. And we shrink it down. Now, of course, if you have a hot air gun like I've got, you can use that. And that's great because it's designed for it. If you don't, then you can just use the barrel of your soldering iron, and that will shrink this stuff down, you know, like so. But I'm gonna have to make sure it doesn't slide too much so you end up with the solder poking out the end. Make sure they're all lined up properly. That looks okay. But hey, what's the point in having all this fun technology if you don't use it? So I'm going to turn on my hot air gun and I'll blast it with that so I can skite at you. See this? Woohoo! Okay, you know, they should be roughly in the right place. Oh man, these shaky hands are killing me. But here we go, and this will shrink up the, whoops, but you do it in shot because it's all upside down. It shrinks down the wire, shrinks down the heat shrink. Whoops, that was, turn it around the side. Should have used the soldering iron, shouldn't I? I'm all over the place today. Here we go. And voila, as we say in India. Oops. So there you go, that's soldering done on one of the arms. It's not hard, it's pretty simple, and it produces a reasonably neat result. But what we're going to have to do, of course, is, I better zoom out again now because otherwise you won't be able to see what I'm doing. Let's see this. Focus goes all funny when you go away from the macro version. Hopefully it's focused now. There we go. So yeah, we're going to have to push this in, and we'll have to sort of just bend these wires perhaps up a little bit, I don't know, to get this past the bolts here. So we're going to end up with a bit of messy wiring here, but that's just the price you pay for not wiring it straight to this circuit board, which is going to be so much harder for the average punter who doesn't do a lot of soldering. So there we go. That's one of the arms done. I haven't actually taped this down yet, but we have that little strip that I was talking about. Or we can use, and this is what I like to use actually, this works out really well, is some heat shrink, some big heat shrink. Now, I just cut a few strips of this with my scissors like this. This is 19 millimeters, I think. I hate it when they put the label on. I don't want the label bit. God, let's do it at this end. Let's cut this piece here, and it should just be wide enough to cover up those ugly wires. Here we go. And it should slide over the wires and the ESC. I've got the right size. Look at that. And over here now, I can shrink this down and it will cover up that wiry mess that I did. Let's just see if that works. I'm going to push this up here and I shall get my hot air gun out, but I haven't got the big nozzle on, so it might take a bit of work. So try and keep it all in shot again. Shrink this down. Should have got my big nozzle for this. It's much quicker with a big nozzle. But let's turn this over. Try and keep this in the right place. And it does get a bit ugly around the edges if you're not careful, but hey, I'll turn over and actually I've got the lighting on the wrong side because this was not done the way I wanted to do it. Whoops, I've got to line up because again, we're all back to front in the camera view. There we go. So I'm going to heat this heat shrink down here. That's going to hold the ESC on, hopefully. Better do it so you can see it, not just me. Here we go, heating. There we go. It hides that nasty, horrible mess that we made. And if I can get it right, because I've stuffed this up a bit. Never mind. That's life in the big city. I'll heat this down here. Pull this bit down here. Here we go. I should have actually put the ESC in a bit further, but I didn't, so bad me. Never mind. There we go. So that's going to cover up that end of that ESC, and I'm just going to put another piece of heat shrink over here just to hold the rest of the ESC in place. As you see, I should have actually slid this in a bit further. I could always do it again, but can I be bothered? No, I can't. So there you go. I'll cut a much smaller bit to do. So you can use this as it's like you can use cable ties. If you don't have big heat shrink, just use cable ties. But I think this just gives a nicer job. It just looks a little bit nicer when you do it this way. So now I'll heat this up and make sure my wires are on the right place. I'll move it actually so it's just over there, and we'll see how that works out. Before anybody asks, well, how are you going to put the legs on? You don't use the legs on these little ZMR 250s. They're just a waste of time and waste of space, extra weight and something else to break. So don't worry about the fact that we're not having any legs on it. And I've never used legs on a ZMR yet, and I've never felt the need to put them on. So here we go. Should tidy the back of this one up a bit too. You can't see, I've got to do it so the air rises to get a good job. So you can't see what I'm doing. Sorry about that. Right, so there you go, there's an arm, look at that, isn't that beautiful? And it's reasonably aerodynamic, I suppose. Piece of cake, all you could do is just follow me there. And I've pushed this along a bit. God, this was a bit bodge, but never mind, it does the job, it'll prove the point. There you go, so now we've got a motor, ESC on an arm. As I say, that's one arm. Now I want you to make another arm exactly the same as this, exactly the same with the wires 1-to-1 on the motor, and then on two of the other arms, so the first half are straight 1-to-1, on the other two just reverse or just swap over any two wires. It can be the two outside ones, or it can be the inside and one of the outsides, or whatever. Just, we don't want it going 1-to-1. So this will spin one way, the other arms will spin the other way, and I'll show you then. And what it's worth doing, actually, it really is worth doing it, is putting a bit of tape on here and marking which way these go, because once you put the heat shrink on, if you're going to use heat shrink, you'll forget which one's which. So we just put a piece of tape on here, which we'll take off later, and I'll just mark this as straight. If my pen will work. Oh man, here we go. Well, you get the idea. This is the one that's wired straight through, and that will enable us to determine which is going to go one way and which is going to go the other way. Because if you buy these motors and these ESCs, then I can't remember at the moment, but I'll tell you which ones to put in which corner. So as long as you know, you'll be able to put them in without having to worry about, oh, have I got them around the right way? That's one of the benefits of a build video like this, because if you follow me, you don't have to do a whole lot of thinking for yourself. And here's what I mean about crossing the wires over. As you can see, the ESC's up the same way. This wire goes straight through, but the yellow one crosses over to the outside edge and the red one crosses over to the inside edge, which means the motor will run in the opposite direction to when we have them just wired straight through. So once we put that together, we would take our piece of tape and we would write on there, crossed. And probably if you watch further through this video, you'll find out which way turns which way. So I'll just write crossed on here. That can be clockwise or anti-clockwise, but I'm too lazy to test right at the moment, so I'm just going to put that on there so I know that this is one of the crossed arms, because now, actually I won't, because I'll put heat shrink over it, won't I? So I'll put it around this way. Now I'm going to tighten up the heat shrink, and we've got 2 arms done. Okay, here's another option for your ESC mounting. If you don't want to use heat shrink, it's just a cable tie. It's pretty simple, and wrap it around there. Wider ones are better than thinner ones because they distribute the load, and of course you get less likely to get them twisting like this. You will have to bunch your little wire up here, but you can do it quite neatly. See, that'll fit up there quite nicely. Perhaps put another cable tie around there, and there you go. It still gives you the ability to slide this backwards and forwards a bit. Although these arms are tapered, so the cable tie itself may tend to wander down here. Although, you know, you could always just put a bit of tape on it as well, I suppose. But yeah, as I say, I prefer to use heat shrink, but don't let that put you off using a cable tie if that's all you've got. So there you go. After a little bit of slaving away, you should end up with 4 arms like these. And 2 of them, well, one of them I haven't labelled because I can work it out. That's a straight through one. That's a straight through one. So these 2 are the crossed over ones. So we've got pairs of arms, and there you go. You notice that, I mean, the heat shrinking, I'm trying to do this as quickly as possible because everyone wants this video, so I didn't measure the heat shrink. I just bunged it on, and you might use cable ties as I showed you before. So that's it. These arms, we can now set them aside because now we're going to start working on the main frame.